Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 192 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining us for another interview episode where we track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that we can share their secrets with you. This time around, I get to hang out with Kenny Richards, founder of Vermont-based Halyard Brewing Company. He's here to teach us about a centuries-old beverage that was deboozed because of prohibition, and that he is determined to return to its rightful place in the fermented pantheon. That's right, we're going to be tasting and talking about alcoholic ginger beer. But before we start enjoying this delicious historical drink, I do have a quick announcement, which is this. It's time for the Tales of the Cocktail Spirited Awards, and I'm here to ask you to nominate the Modern Bar Cart podcast for Best Broadcast, Podcast, or Online Video Series. This year, the awards are very media focused because the pandemic crippled bars and restaurants, and we're really pushing to make the list of finalists. We've upped our game substantially this past year, and by helping us to make the final cut for this award, you'll really expand our reach, which means bigger and better guests, cool new projects, and the same free weekly podcast you've come to know and love. There's only a few days left to nominate, so if you're hearing this, it means it's already crunch time. Head over to the show notes page for this episode and be sure to click the link to make a quick account with Tales of the Cocktail and submit your nomination. This is one of those quick, simple things to do that will have a huge impact on me and the rest of the Modern Bar Cart team, so please consider helping out. With that housekeeping done, let's get to the good stuff. I think it's time for you to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Sunset Storm. It's a custom riff on the Dark and Stormy made using Halyard Brewing Company ginger beer. To make it, you'll need 1 ounce of dark rum. Halyard recommends Mount Gay Black Barrel. 3/4 ounce of Aperol. 4 ounces of Volcano Juice ginger beer shandy. 1 ounce orange juice, 1/2 ounce lemon juice, and 5 to 6 dashes of Angostura bitters. In a cocktail shaker with ice, combine the rum, Aperol, and citrus juices. Shake vigorously until the ingredients are well chilled. Strain into a Collins glass with ice, and top up with about 4 ounces of the Volcano Juice ginger beer shandy. Garnish this cocktail with several dashes of Angostura bitters, which create a stormy colored gradient as they gradually mix with the drink, and a lemon wheel, which emulates the setting sun. What I like about the Sunset Storm is that it shows off what Halyard Brewing Company's ginger beer can do when mixed with other sweeteners and acids. We talk at length later in the episode about just what creates these really complex sweetness and acid profiles, but suffice it to say that this drink is a shining example of how they all work together in the glass. So, now that you've got yourself a nautical drink, let's sail away into the interview. In this wide-ranging conversation with entrepreneur and ginger beer philosopher Kenny Richards, some of the topics we discuss include how Kenny left behind a career in academia to resurrect one of America's most beloved and yet also most forgotten drink categories. What it's like to scale a brewery from a few barrels to a much more ambitious craft operation, and what implications this has on ingredients, people, and process. We taste through 4 popular and very different expressions of Halyard's ginger beers, beginning with Nicole's Extra, followed by Volcano Juice, The Breeze, and Mountain Aid. We talk about the best ways to use alcoholic ginger beer in cocktails, and especially the numerous opportunities there are to innovate within the buck/mule category. We discuss what it means to become, be, and remain authentic in the age of peak hazy IPAs, glitter beer, and hard seltzer. We cover why Vermonters are constantly stuffing beers in their pockets, the aesthetics of a perfect moonrise, what to drink with Enlightenment philosopher Baruch Spinoza, and much, much more. Kenny is exactly the kind of person we all hope is behind the helm at any craft operation. He's thoughtful, focused, and takes a deep craftsman-like pleasure in the flavors and products he creates and shares. I hope you'll pick up a pack of Halyard's hard ginger beer next time you see it on the shelves near you. And if I don't say it enough during this interview, let me say it here. This stuff is the perfect drink for summer get-togethers. With that, please enjoy this fun conversation with the man who made it his mission to buck convention like a mule, Kenny Richards. Kenny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
So we're going to get to some amazing ginger beer tastings today. Not exactly what I thought I was going to be doing at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, but what we're going to lean into it. But before we do, just introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm really excited to be here and talk with you. It's a really great podcast. My name is Kenny Richards. I'm the CEO and founder of Halyard Brewing Co. We make hard ginger beer. Just to kind of introduce myself and talk about where I'm from and how I got into this, it's not the most direct story for folks, although not outside of the normal. I've lived a lot of lives before entering the craft beverage industry. I worked as a chef, professional archaeologist, bartender, farmer, and for a long stint, about 8 years, as an academic and completing my graduate studies in religion and anthropology.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you were digging in the dirt a lot then, archaeology and farming.
Yeah, I did. But then I totally pivoted. And after doing this really interesting ethnobotany field school in the Amazon for a few months, I decided to study religion and went to CU for my master's and then went to UNC Chapel Hill for my PhD. And, it's interesting, as a total aside, there's a bunch of us with like religion and philosophy degrees in Vermont that have breweries. The list is kind of long. So anywhere from like Zero Gravity to Hill Farmstead to Shaxbury to Havoc Mead. So we have this like little cabal of philosophers and religious studies people here in Vermont. But while I was working on my PhD, doing some American history, some early American history stuff, I came across this mention of hard ginger beer, and I was really fascinated. And I'm kind of the person who's always making something, right? Like from sourdough to cured meats to scobies, right? And I was like, oh, this would be a really fun project to try to like reinvent or rediscover what hard ginger beer tastes like. And, interestingly, I'm sure as a lot of your listeners know, there's a ton of information on the web about how to do craft beer at home and how to homebrew and how to make cider, but there's really not much out there all about hard ginger beer. So it's really this invention and discovery process that, at one point, I think when my wife finally said enough, I had like taken everything out of our fridge and converted it into like a bright tank and had things bubbling all over the house. And she's like, we need to feed our family, and eventually came up with a recipe that I really loved and a process that I really loved. Simultaneously, I was becoming really increasingly disenfranchised from the academic career path in the humanities. So my wife, who was from Vermont, and we both decided to jump ship and left my PhD program after completing my dissertation comps and my exams and kind of in that last stage. So it was a pretty big move for us. She's from Vermont. She's a dance artist. She has her MFA. We both kind of decided to move here to raise our family. We've got 2 small kids and start businesses. I didn't really know anything about running a business, much less a production brewery. So not surprisingly, I couldn't really find anyone to invest in me to not only start a brewery in an almost unknown category, but to revive a product that nobody was drinking. Fortunately, I found a small nano brewery in South Burlington, which I leased, and created a space for me to, through the help of a lot of people in the industry here and a lot of trial and error and a lot of successes, but also failures, to build a brewery and revive this forgotten product. Now 5 years later, we're distributed in 10 states. We're sold in stores like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and Publix and Hannaford. And, we're really working to carve out our niche as the American craft ginger beer.
Yeah, it's an exciting story. I can relate to the leaving the humanities for pastures that are less depressing sometimes. I was getting paid better as somebody who is teaching poetry courses on like some sort of fellowship to complete my MFA than the salary they offered me once I then got that degree. So
yeah, it's really hard.
That was the come to Jesus moment for me.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's funny how many of us end up in the industry as well. I think there's some. I would love to know more. Like, there's some connection between the amount of alcohol that monks drank and produced, and the amount of us who've like left the humanities and find ourselves in the industry. Maybe correlation.
Exactly. Well, so a couple things I want to talk about before we crack into our first tasting. One, most people think of ginger beer, of course, as a soda product, as something with a little bit of sugar, a decent amount of carbonation, that good pop of ginger. We often encounter it in the cold case next to things like kombucha, things like ginger ale, things like, other, sort of, we might say health adjacent sodas, and that, ginger beer has some decent like gut benefits. But the hard aspect of it, I think, is something that most people initially would view as a non sequitur, because when we think of cocktails that incorporate ginger beer, well, you're getting the alcohol from elsewhere. So I guess I was hoping you could back us into this by talking a little bit about some of the historical precedents for the product that you're making that you encountered while doing your research, and maybe that will help kind of ease us into this tasting.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a really fascinating history. If you ever sat down and wondered, like, why is ginger beer called ginger beer? Or why is ginger ale called ginger ale? Like, why is that word there? And it turns out that there was a time when all ginger ale was alcoholic, right? It was first brewed during the colonial spice trade, right, by the English. And you find it as a predominant beverage throughout the English colonies. And a really interesting example of the way foods moved around the world at the time, as well as colonial period fermentation techniques and the amount of alcohol that was being consumed during that time period, which is mind-boggling. I think I remember, this is totally an aside, but I think I remember in some research that the average American person in the like mid 18th century would drink the equivalent of around 12 shots, 12 2-ounce pours a day. Yeah. Right? Like, it was a regular, like, you had some with breakfast, you had some lunch, you had some dinner, then you go to the tavern. So ginger beer, you got cane sugar coming out of the Caribbean, you got ginger, originally coming from Southeast Asia, but also being cultivated elsewhere in warm climates. And the combination of those with water to produce this really mildly alcoholic beverage. That became really popular throughout the colonies, but especially in the U.S. up until Prohibition. Where else do you see it outside of the U.S., right? Like, you see it in Jamaica, Australia, Canada, right? And in these places, including the U.K., who don't have the history of Prohibition to shut it down, it still survives as a viable category with a lot of brands who work in that space. But in the U.S., Prohibition, we're still recovering it, right? We're still recovering from this, from this period of time in our history. But it totally put a stop to the alcoholic production of hard ginger beer. But it was such a popular beverage, and that with the invention of carbonation techniques, you eventually see it return and thrive as a soda.
That makes sense to me, because so if we think about how these things must have naturally unfolded, the first affordance that ginger has is as a root crop, it is quasi-stable for transport, perhaps even more stable than some citrus might have been at the time. And so it makes sense that ginger would have spread as a fairly popular, and, due to the, I'm imagining, relatively low loss rates, you're probably going to be able to afford ginger perhaps better than you would be able to afford other flavoring agents at the time. So it makes sense that would be something that people gravitated to as a flavorant for some of the beverages that they were making. Of course, other beverages at this time, switchels, what happens if you leave a switchel out too long? Well, it's going to ferment. Like anything that contains a decent amount of sugar and is exposed to yeast and the microbiome that's just floating in the air all around us, it's going to start fermenting. So I can see why that this naturally would have occurred. And then I've also been spending a decent amount of time thinking about the late 1800s, and in some of the reading that I've done recently, just like carbonation was just so revolutionary. I don't think that people really appreciate how the ability to force carbonate things really opened up people's eyes to different beverage applications. So I could see why that this would have, especially in the 40 years approaching prohibition have been such an exciting product for people. People would have gone bananas over it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to dig into the history of forced carbonation, right? Like, and where did that really start to kick off with people in the soda tradition and just the hard waters, right? Especially in the cocktail world. But yeah. And look, it's, as a beverage, right, I have some really fun, like I have some history, but I also have some fun, just like anecdotal stuff about it too, right? You know, a friend of mine and beer historian here in Vermont, Adam Krakowski, you know, he has shown me ginger beer recipes that he's uncovered doing historical research in archives that date back to the mid 18th century in Vermont, right, for hard ginger beer. Really fascinating. So we know it was being brewed back then. We know that he's also told me that there were 2 public production for ginger beer breweries in Vermont prior to Prohibition that were both shut down. As far as the like material history of ginger beer, you've probably seen the little clay crocks it used to be served in. So if you Google just like ginger beer, alcoholic ginger beer in 19th century or something, you'll get these images of these little clay crocks. There's one in the Titanic Museum, right? Because they found one when excavating the Titanic. At a beer tasting, I met this older man once who told me that he grew up Amish and that his grandfather used to ferment ginger beer in their basement and used to like sneak them down and pour some for him. And so there's this kind of like underground history of it, and that can still continued on in some places, although pretty quietly. And then outside of New England here or the U.S., a good friend of my father's, Victor, he's from Jamaica, and he used to tell me that his mother, growing up in Jamaica, his mother used to take a big bowl, put it on the table with a bunch of macerated fresh ginger, sugar, and water, and just sort of let it open ferment for a few days. Right? Then whenever she thought it tasted right, she would take an entire bottle of rum and just dump it into it. Right? And that's how they got their like ginger beer beverage. And I'm kind of assuming the rum helped like stall the fermentation and stabilize it, make it a little healthier. And then you just put it in jars and throw it in the fridge. And sounds amazing to me. So there are ways that,
there are a lot of, in the Caribbean tradition with a lot of some of the syrups and like tiki, also kind of like pre-tiki and tiki adjacent mixers, you'll see ginger incorporated quite a bit. So yeah, for sure. So
it has this really interesting history that, and where I'm fascinated by it is that it's really been forgotten, and especially as a production process, it's been forgotten. And when I look back to the recipes that my friend Adam has showed me, I can't use these recipes, right? They're not designed for modern production, and some of them involve ingredients that you can't even use today, as well. And so the process of reinventing it and reviving it has been really fun. It's been challenging, right? Because it's like, well, what do I think it should taste like? What do I want it to taste like? Where do I set the bar? As being one of the first and one of the largest U.S. ginger beer breweries, I kind of have the responsibility of being like, this is what I think hard ginger beer should taste like. And it's fun. It's daunting, right? But it's fun. And some of the things that for me are really important is, and we can get into this in the tasting, but like it's a fermented product, so it's not going to be cloyingly sweet like one of the sodas, right? It's the when I make ginger beer, I use evaporated cane sugar, molasses, fresh ginger, and water, and we brew it and we pitch yeast on it, right? The sugars are there's a little bit of fermentables from the ginger, but it's mostly coming from the cane sugar and molasses, and most of the sugar is mostly gone, right? And so our ginger beers, like the Nicole's, actually the first one we're going to sample is only 5 grams of sugar, right? Where like a soda is going to have 30 to 40 grams of sugar in a 12-ounce serving, and that's drastically different. It means it performs differently in cocktails. It means it tastes differently. It means it's a wholly different product. Plus, you add all the characteristics that come from fermentation, you get a pretty different product.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that most people would assume would be that, like, all right, I'm going to make an alcoholic ginger beer. Great, I've made an alcoholic ginger beer. We're done. But you've sort of continued to evolve your offerings so that not only are you playing around with other flavors, but you've got a sort of a range of ABVs here. What have we've got all the way from, I think, 4.5 to 6.1.
Yeah,
is that
6%.
correct?
Yeah, and we've actually brewed some even higher, up to 8%. I mean, like, we can take cane sugar, molasses, and ginger, and we can create a wide variety of ginger beers from it, right? We've brewed dark ginger beers before. We've brewed like really light, effervescent. We've brewed kind of these really wonderful amber rich ones, crazy spicy ones, ones that we brew on a smaller scale to experiment before we put them on the market. But yeah, it provides an incredible amount of space to play in from a production side, which also keeps us and our our brewing team happy, right? Because you get to reinvent. It's not just doing the same thing every day.
Yeah. Well, why don't you take us through the first tasting, and I guess we'll go from there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so the first one I want to sample is our Nicole's Extra ginger beer. It is a Caribbean-style ginger beer. It's 6%. It's dry, has a nice little ginger bite. It's brewed with nutmeg, capsicum, a fair amount of ginger. It's golden in color.
Can confirm, yeah. Ooh. Yeah, it's nosing it right now. Not like a ginger beer that I would expect to get out of a soda case. Like it's distinctly different. It's the ginger beer that I'm thinking of that I would just grab and down on a hot day. It's almost like got a peppery smell. It does kind of smell like nosing a beer, but I'm definitely getting some of those molasses notes as well. It's kind of surprising, to be honest. Like I came into this with zero expectations, and I'm honestly surprised by the complexity of just the nose, which I imagine is the yeast that we're going to talk a little bit more about. And oh wow, you're not kidding! It is super dry.
Yeah, there's only 5 grams of sugar in the whole 12 ounce, so it's
It reminds me, honestly, I think the closest experience that I can describe would be like a dry mead, because there are a few dry meads that I've had. Charm City Mead Works has one or two that are kind of in this dimension, but then on top of the sort of sugar and flavor profile, you add the chemist's thesis. You get the back of the tongue and kind of like warmth in the throat from the ginger here. And I wouldn't say, like, honestly, I would say the ginger flavor in a lot of those sodas is more intense because it's playing against all that sugar.
Yeah, that's right. Sugar can act as a vehicle for a lot of what people think of when they think of ginger flavor, which is that like candy ginger kind of like base note, right? I'm really trying to bring out fresh ginger, which is more of like a heat, more of like a higher note. That little bit of base notes in there, but I don't want to bring this like super sugary bomb. I want to try to create something that I think is first within a craft tradition, but also I don't really like sweet things as a person who drinks, as a drinker. So like, or in my beverages, I should say. And so I want something that's dry. I think dryness requires more complexity, more care in a product. And it also makes it a little easier to like, you can feel good about it too. So
yeah. And it doesn't feel like desserty. It doesn't feel like a guilty pleasure. It feels like a simple pleasure.
Yeah, thanks.
And a couple follow-ups here. One, who is Nicole, and why is this ginger beer extra?
Yeah, thanks. Nicole's my wife, and when I started Halyard, the first 2 brews I actually put on the market were the True Ginger Beer, which was this like lightly hopped ginger beer, which we don't do anymore. And then the Wayward, which is an amber ginger beer brewed with molasses and clove and vanilla, which is like 7.8%. We don't package it in cans. It takes a lot of ginger to make it, so we just can't put it on the market at a price that people are going to buy. But it's really delicious. We were getting to a point where she was like, just describing me the ginger beer she wanted. And so, as an artist, she was working. We did a collaborative fundraiser with this local nonprofit that supports dance arts in Vermont, and we brewed the beer for this event at this like really cool little local restaurant. Brewed it for her and for her art and this and kind of an homage to our relationship. And it's called Nicole's Extra because it's like she's gonna have an extra one, right? It's just like there's extra ginger in it, but it's also this like kind of like play because she really likes them, so she'll usually have an extra one.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And so one of the things that we haven't covered in terms of the overall, like the big picture production processes is, are you juicing this ginger? Are you pitching it in as like diced, or because, you know, we use ginger when we make our cocktail bitters. So, you know, when we do that, we just sort of, you know, dice it up and chuck it in the extraction vessel. Is this a juiced product?
Yeah, so we'll need to get you to sign an NDA real fast. No, just kidding. For our core brews that we're sampling today, we do use ginger juice in the fermentation process. It is a Peruvian ginger that's organic and fair trade. That fortunately, a friend of mine in a local food manufacturer does for us. I started off juicing it ourselves, but we're at a point where it takes a lot of juice and a lot of ginger, and so it's cold pressed, which is really important. As you probably know from cocktail creation, if you juice something under grinding it up, it heats it up, and that can actually disrupt the intensity of flavor. And so cold pressed juices for a lot of different types of things you're going to juice are going to hold more complexity of flavor, hold more brightness and freshness. And so we use a cold pressed ginger juice in our brews.
Yeah, the reason why I asked is because generally there is some sort of story about scaling, and ginger is just it's one of those products where it's like, if you're going to use the juice, you're gonna encounter some growing pains along the way. So I kind of figured there was a story there, but
yeah, totally. We will do on some of our spicier, like the wayward I was telling you about. We will make a mash out of macerated ginger, and like a long steeping boiling process. But it's not scalable to what at our current production means just scalable to what we're doing right now.
Right.
But juice is really amazing. It's like there's this really crazy starch that comes in ginger juice too. That when you kind of like scoop up the bottom, it's like cornstarch and water, but it's unique to ginger. Pretty neat. Not spicy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super spicy. I mean, we have a wonderful ginger syrup that we sell on our e-commerce site. From Pratt Standard, and it's the same thing. Like that syrup, it settles out in the bottle, and I from a consumer standpoint, I'm sure it looks sketchy, because we're programmed to see separation as a flaw, right? Unless it's in salad dressing, that separation is not supposed to occur. But it's when you shake that thing up, you're getting some serious spice, and I mean, so we've got the Nicole's Extra is, I think, a perfect starter here. Because it breaks you in, I would say, in a very refreshing, light, effervescent way. But then the second one we have here is a little bit more intimidating based on the name. It's called.
It's a misnomer. Yeah, people can get confused. So first of all, for these products, I don't brew. None of them are so spicy you can't handle it, right? I wanted to brew something that's really drinkable, that tastes like ginger, but that's not too crazy hot, too crazy spicy. Of the ones you're sampling today, the Nicole's Extra is actually the most gingery. The next one we're going to try, the Volcano Juice, is a funny story. It's back when I'm like the first year of business. I had the tap room. We only had a couple ginger beers on tap, and I wanted to like provide more offerings for people, but weren't like expanding beyond those two lines yet. So I did what has been done for a long period of time, and I made a shandy. I took ginger beer and I poured lemonade in it and started serving to people, and they totally loved it. And so the Volcano Juice is a sort of light ginger beer that we brew, and then after it's finished fermenting, we blend in house-made lemonade with it to bring that kind of like lemon and sweetness to the ginger to make this light, and what I like to describe as just a really crushable day beverage, right?
It really does strike like a shandy. It's you definitely get the lemon on the nose, and then you get. It's funny in the tongue plays tricks on us sometimes, and and thinking about this, like I get almost a similar level of spice, but it's not the spice. It's that citric tang on the back of the tongue that creates that little not a painful, but like a little, a chemisthetic sensation when you get that citric acid from the lemon juice in there. And so to me, it's like, even if it's maybe technically less spicy, it kind of, it still asserts itself in a similar way as the Nicole's Extra. But you're right. I mean, if you're not paying attention, this is going to be, your glass is going to be empty before you realize it.
Yeah, thanks. And the reason we call it Volcano Juice is because the lemons we source for it are grown on Mount Etna in Sicily. So these like really fantastic lemons that we're actually using juice. We're not using concentrates. We're not using, and we get this really awesome, fantastic quality lemon juice for the volcano juice. And it's like, it grows on a volcano juice kind of rhymes, but it also like flows in with this real island vibe of the beverage. So that's where the name comes from.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, obviously Italy, the Mediterranean in general, kind of famous for citrus. What are these lemons called? Is this like a special type, like it's like the San Marzano tomato of lemons or something like that?
Yeah. You're catching me. I don't know the name of the lemon itself. I can get back to you about that. We can put it in our notes.
Yeah,
but
we'll look at, we'll definitely put it in the show notes if we can find it. But yeah, that's a cool little story. I imagine there's not too many lemons that grow on Mount Etna, so that's a great thing to be able to offer. So I have a question about the facility itself. Do you just have a production facility and then you're putting these things straight on trucks and sending them to stores, or do you have a tasting room set up in Vermont where people can actually come and experience it?
Yeah, so we have, like a lot of manufacturers who go from small to big really quickly, we use contract brewing to meet our growing demand. And fortunately, we've been able to partner with some really great contract brewers to nearby to get the product out in the market that we love. We also still have our brewery and tap room, but for our contract brewers, and it's a relationship, right? We're present, we work with them. It's not just like, here's your recipe, we'll talk to you in 6 months, right? It's a collaborative process. It's also about how I consider craft and the importance of craft making, right? But we work with Singlecut, which is based out of New York. They have a really wonderful brewery started in the city, and then they have another facility just a couple hours away from us here in Vermont over in Clifton Park, right across the New York border. And then we are partnering this year with Shacksbury Cider as well to create excess capacity. They're based out of Virgins, another really great cider company. It has an awesome product. And so we're really fortunate to work with such well-respected manufacturers to help bring our product to market. We still have our original 2-barrel nano brewery that I founded it in, which is this relic, right? Where the tap room is, and we do our experimental brews, and we really kind of try to push the category at a 2-barrel cost, which is a really affordable way to fail, as opposed to like brewing large volumes of it. We've had the tap room closed since COVID. Vermont, we were really strict here in our COVID regulations, and the tap room is really small, so it never worked to have it open, which is a real bummer because we had a cocktail bar in there as well as a ginger beer brewery. So we had like 7 or 8 ginger beers on tap, and then a rotating special cocktail list, and then about 10 or 12 ginger beer cocktails that were always on. It was a really fun place to play and experiment.
Yeah. So do you have plans to open it up again when things start to relax a little?
Yep, absolutely. We're working on that. The state is gradually opening its bars and restaurants. Currently, we have one of the highest vaccination rates in the country here, so it's people are feeling more comfortable going back out into the world. So excited to get the bar open again and start inviting people back in.
Yeah, we'll put some pictures over on the show notes page. So if you're in driving radius, or if you find yourself traveling to Vermont anytime in the near future, then we'll give you something to look forward to with that, hopefully. But what I wanted to transition to, and you can bring in our next 2 tastings however you'd like to, but I wanted to talk about, since we're mentioning cocktail bars here, I wanted to talk about use cases for alcoholic ginger beer, because of course, these look like beers. They look like beers. They look like seltzers. They look like things that I would drink straight from the can if I wasn't sitting here nosing them in glasses. But when we think of ginger beer in the cocktail world, we think of the buck category. We think of the mules, the Moscow Mule, the Kentucky Mule. We think of the El Diablo cocktail, which is something that you have on your brand materials, which I think is probably one of my favorite applications for a ginger beer in a cocktail format. But when we think of these, it's basically you take a booze, you take a ginger beer, and you take a citrus, and somewhere in there's a sugar, whether that's from the ginger, because the ginger beer you're using is so sugary, or, with the addition of some sort of fortifier. But I mean, how do you think about your ginger beer when we start to approach it as a mixer with other, boozes and flavors?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And one that I love to talk about. I love to experiment with, to see how it works and to open up the cocktail world, with Halyard and look at Halyard as a cocktail ingredient. One of the interesting things that when we try to sell it into bars, sometimes a bartender will be like, "But it's already alcoholic. I don't want to make the drinks too boozy." And I'm like, "Come on, you're putting booze on booze all day long, right?" So, but aside from the alcoholic aspect of it aside, I think what's really fascinating from a cocktail perspective is that it's very different than sodas, right? As you've tasted, it's drier. You have yeast characteristics. It's a very different product, and it's going to make your cocktails very different. So it's not going to it makes it like to make a mule out of the Nicole's Extra. It's great. It's dry. It's bubbly. Put a nice half ounce of lime juice on it, and it's still real refreshing and delicious. But it's not going to taste like the mule that they're used to, or a dark and stormy that's loaded with sugar. Right? It's going to be a very different beverage. It's still really yummy, but it's different. And so a lot of bartenders, when we out in the world for Halyard, but also at our bar, we don't like to warn people, but like, just so you know, this isn't like the sugar bomb you're used to. But it comes back to that like perfect little ratio that you get out of bucks, right? The spirit, the citrus, the ginger beer, and the sweetener. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding of the history is that a horse's neck is ginger beer and citrus. It's called a horse's neck. It's a pre-prohibition era beverage. And a buck, the idea was you put spirit into a horse's neck and it causes the horse to buck, right? So it's not like the deer with the antlers. It's like the actual act of bucking is where the name comes from. And on one hand, because it's such a good combo, you can do a ton with it, right? And really kind of go back and explore some historical aspects of it that might be on your cocktail menu, but you might have totally forgotten about. Like some of my favorites are the Vertigo, which is ginger beer, Amaro Averna, and lemon juice. Right? We use the Volcano Juice in that, and it's 2 ounces of Averna and 1 ounce of lemon juice and Volcano Juice, and it's fantastic. Florodora, which is gin, lime, and framboise in ginger beer. Right? Super yummy. The Italian Buck, which I like to make, is ginger beer and some type of like bitter amaro or something. I like to use
Chinar.
Yes, thank you. And that's embarrassing, but that's what I love. The squeeze of lemon juice on it, right? That like the bitter from the artichoke makes it really wonderful. So there's a lot that can be done there. There's also some other classics like the penicillin, which is really wonderful. Other ways that I like to use it in cocktails that I like to push the envelope on cocktail, maybe not push the envelope, but like I once had a bartender tell me that like ginger beer is like bacon. It's really good with everything. And so you can add it to a lot of beverages. I like to add it to various tikis. So like throw some Nicole's Extra on top of your next Jungle Bird, right? Or some Halyard on a Mai Tai. It actually works really well. And then there's some bartenders in the local area that I'm friends with who do some really fun things. Like my friend Emily, who has this really cool cocktail bar called Deli 126 in Burlington, makes what she calls the industry mule that has Fernet, chartreuse, lemon, simple, and ginger beer in it, right? And it really works. And so there's a lot of ways that you can play with it. To recognize that it's not that super sweet ginger beer that you're going to get from the soda, but it does provide something unique and interesting that. For those of you who are going to really nerd out on like what would a historical cocktail look like, right? You can say, I got this cool thing called Halyard, and it's dry and it's fermented, and it's going to provide a different aspect to a cocktail than what you're usually going to get out of soda.
Yeah, I like that. And, you know, so if we think of the buck or the mule as something where the balance is achieved because there's a lot of sugar in the ginger beer, well, the logic would, like, if you just calm down and think about this for a second, it makes all the sense in the world. Okay, in a regular buck or a regular mule, most of the sugar is in the ginger beer. What happens when you take most of that sugar out of the ginger beer? The logic would sort of dictate that you need to, if you want to get that balance, the sugar now needs to come from somewhere else. And at least in a cocktail format, that opens the doors to other additives. We've mentioned so far, you know, chartreuse, chinar, amaro averna, like all of these things. You know, you were mentioning a jungle bird. There's Campari. You were mentioning a Mai Tai. There's orgeat. You know, there's a lot of everything that you described. There was another sweetener, and then it seems like the Halyard product is uniquely suited to bring in a couple of characteristics. Obviously the ginger, but regular ginger beer does that as well. But here, you know, some of the more yeasty characteristics, you know, that's not something that you're going to find in a regular mule or buck format, you know? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to play there, not only with the different opportunities to throw in cordials, like the framboise you said. That's, you know, I could imagine creme de cassis being a popular mixer with some of your products as well. Like there's just so much you can do with it. Like even just as I'm riffing in my own head right now, because this is so dry, I could see making a Kir Royale out of it, you know, where this replaces the dry sparkling white wine. Is it going to be different? Yeah, it's going to be yeastier, and depending on what or maybe I would just use the Volcano Juice and it would be pretty similar, where the lemon notes are going to kind of mimic those lemon notes in champagne. So, you know, I get some really great just ideas thinking about what the opportunity is when there's less sugar in the ginger beer, as opposed to just assuming that in my normal buck or mule, the sugar is going to be brought by the ginger beer. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's very exciting to me.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really awesome way to think about it, especially as you think about how you build your drinks, right? And where are the elements and the components coming from? And wanting to build drinks that have ginger beer in them that aren't gonna, you have to somehow compensate for the added sugar that's coming from the soda. So where do you build it, and all of the variety that opens up for you without serving your, you know, serving customers or making a drink at home that's just going to be a sugar bomb.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I mean, lower sugar is, you know, probably for a lot of, actually, I was going to say for better or for worse, but almost definitely for better, a trend these days that is on the rise. So it seems like from an adoption standpoint, you're probably going to get more people who are automatically inclined to like this than you would have 10 years ago. Yeah.
But we can't underestimate the power of sweetness too, right? Like people love sugar. I mean, the Volcano Juice is our best seller and it's our sweetest, right? So that's not just like, there's a little causation there going on. And, but balancing that. And I think that as consumers and people looking at health trends, but also where the industry is going in sweetness, we can be mindful of the amount of sweeteners we're doing and recognize that sugar can be a crutch, right? Like fat can be a crutch in cooking, sugar can be a crutch. And I think it takes a lot of care in your mixing and your production to brew something and make something a little drier and allow the ingredients you're using to really stand out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You are definitely more of like you have the gin distiller mentality. Like if you were to be placed on a spectrum of distillers, you would be like the gin guy, because just like I think of barrels in much the same way as I think of sugar, and there's no surprise there, right? A charred barrel has lignans and vanillins and lots of sugars in that wood, and that's what permeates the spirit, and that's why, you know, we enjoy a really nice bourbon. But you know, I do think of barrels sometimes as a crutch, in that I'm way more interested in unaged distillates, and especially botanical distillates, because that's where you can't get away with anything there. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're not going to have any sugar or barrel character to hide behind. I'm sure that most people who love barrel aged spirits will not agree with me. I'm sure that most people who make barrel-aged spirits are going to protest a lot because there is a lot of art that goes on behind the scenes. Blending is fascinating, but at least for the purposes of our conversation here, I see a lot of commonalities between your project and the project of somebody who's trying to create a line of gins where all of the botanical notes are playing well together because there's just nothing really to hide behind.
Yeah, right.
This episode is brought to you by Near Country Provisions. If you're like me, here are some things you might be like. You live in the mid-Atlantic. You enjoy meat. You highly prefer that your meat is local, sustainable, and comes from ethically raised animals. And you'd absolutely love for someone to deliver it to your door once a month. If this sounds like you, then you need Near Country Provisions in your life. Head over to nearcountry.com and check out their different, highly customizable meat delivery packages, and also browse their growing seafood selection. As a thank you for being a Modern Bar Cart listener, you can get 2 free pounds of ground beef or bacon included in your first order after subscribing if you enter the code BARCART, all one word, at checkout. That's BARCART, BARCART, at checkout. Near Country Provisions is the real deal, and I can honestly say that I'd recommend them even if they weren't a sponsor. The meat and the local farmers they work with are just that good. Now, back to the show.
Causes me as well. I mean, so often and any good chef will tell you this, the food's not, whatever thing you cook for somebody is not ever going to be better than the ingredients you put into it, right? Or it can't be worse than that, right? So like the better ingredients you put into something, the better at the end of the day your product's gonna, the food you make is gonna be. You can do something very simple to a really amazing ingredient and have a really good product, right? And so at Halyard, like we nerd out a lot on sourcing to make sure that we're using really quality ingredients, right? Like the sugar we use, it's not just white invert sugar, right? It's like evaporated cane sugar. It's minimally processed. It's U.S. grown. And sugar has its own politics and its own world involved as well. That's probably for another whole entire podcast. But we try to source in ways that are sustainable, right? Like we're currently using Florida crystals, evaporated cane sugar, right? Really wonderful. And trying to reduce environmental impact, but also getting a sugar that's going to carry richness and flavor from it as well. And then the ginger. I mean, ginger is fascinating. Ginger has a terroir, which I'm not sure you're aware of. So like ginger from different places all over the world has it brings different aspects. Peruvian ginger, which we use, really has this awesome balance between flavor and spice, which I love. Like some of the Chinese gingers might be crazy spicy, or like Hawaiian ginger, which is like, I don't know, the best. I think the best ginger in the world is being grown in Hawaii. It's just such rich in flavor, beautiful in color. It's also really expensive for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And or there's even ginger being grown in Vermont, but it's just young ginger, right? And because it's too cold here to grow a perennial subtropical plant, but you can eat young ginger like a carrot. So it's just this really wonderful product, and it brings a lot to the beverage as well.
I like that about sourcing. I'm actually familiar. We use Peruvian ginger in our bitters as well, so I'm familiar with that. It's a lovely thing to work with. I sometimes find that the skin's a little bit thinner. Is that one of the characteristics? Yeah,
and you get it has a high yield. It's really pretty in color. There's a lot of aspects to it that make it really ideal for a ginger beer brewing.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that, as we were going back and forth on before the interview, that you mentioned you wanted to talk about, and maybe we can talk about it while tasting number 3 here, is authenticity. And I figured I'd just throw that out there and let you run with it.
Yeah, thanks. So it was sparked from a question you asked, when we were jamming before, about ABV and the use of ingredients and flavoring, and it just the craft beer world and the beverage world right now it's in a really interesting time, right? Seltzer madness has changed the game. Meanwhile, craft breweries are lots and lots of breweries are trying to like stand out, right? There's so much out there. There's still over 8,000 craft beer breweries in the US. And then there's the RTD thing. There's all these canned cocktails coming to market. And with the proliferation of commodities and you have a race to stand out, right? And what's, you get glitter beer, and you get, I don't know, you get this like race for a gimmick just so you can make a sale. And then on the other hand, you have breweries who are like, nah, F that. We're just going to like stick to what we do. And we're going to brew really good beer. I'm going to make an amazing lager. We got this IPA that we really do really well. Like, and there's just so much fomenting and going on, right? And when I think of authenticity and I think of craft, right? When I think of authenticity and the question of like, well, what about your ingredients? What about your flavorings that you use? What I hear him asking is like, are you a craft brewer? Are you pursuing a craft? What is the care you bring to your production process? And take seltzer as an example. Like, seltzer's seltzer, it's new, which is totally fascinating, right? And look, hard seltzer is fermented invert sugar with some type of distilled, either chemically or actual flavor adjunct. And there's this question, is there such a thing, or is it possible to have craft seltzer? We don't know yet, right? That has yet to be determined. And the behemoths out there who are doing it, like, dare I say, like White Claw's, it's great. I mean, it's White Claw. It's like its thing, right? And, but is there space for the proliferation of it in a craft like there has been in cider or beer, right? If it's just to see who has the next flavor hype, I don't think so. The reason I bring that up, and the reason I kind of, and the same thing with like the proliferation of items in craft beer, is this question of like, well, what's craft and what's authentic? And it's something that we struggle with as we try to build ourselves and scale. And for me, craft comes down to really, really three things that for me that I like to make a stand on craft. But before I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Eric, on this. But I think back to a grad seminar I had where we were discussing authenticity, and I remember this professor of mine at Duke just being like, authenticity is performance. We create authenticity. We perform authenticity, right? Like, think about those people out there who go to great lengths to just perform like, oh, we are the real thing, right? We represent the real craft tradition of X, or we are the most wild fermented, or we are the truest New England IPA. Sure, right? It's a statement. You have to perform that authenticity. And I think where people get hung up, right, and this is like the philosopher in me coming out, where I think people get hung up is that they think that there's an ideal there, that like there's some platonic, there is this thing called an IPA in the world that's held over all. And if we can only find that true perfect thing, right? And look, where I stand on that is there's no there, right? There's no like such thing as the true perfect ideal IPA or the true perfect ideal bourbon. We're all making, we're all inventing, we're all failing, we're all rediscovering generation after generation and going through the work of crafting what becomes authentic, right? As makers, as producers. But that it doesn't leave me in some sort of like postmodern conundrum, right? Where, if there's no such thing, then it doesn't really matter, and we're just going to keep making glitter beer, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think it's incredibly important in this time of mass proliferation and just a lot of really great stuff's being made, a lot of really bad stuff's being made, and it's just all kind of being dumped in the market, and consumers are confused and manufacturers are confused. And I think it is important to sort of like say, well, I think we do need to draw the line somewhere. And we don't need to say that this is what authenticity means for all time, or this is what craft means for all time. But I think it is important to come back and say, well, like, these are what we want, or what I want craft to stand for.
That's interesting. I mean, yeah, I think to me, as you were talking, the one I was trying to think in my mind about like, all right, what to me is authentic, or what to me strikes me about someone who is doing something at a craft level where maybe the capacity is not enough to get them into Whole Foods across the country, but there's something about the quality that really draws me to that product or that company or that person. And for me, I mean, part of it is slow. Like the one word that kept on coming back was slow. And I mean, it's definitely something that I've come across in speaking with craft distillers. I remember I can literally hear my friend R.B. Wolfensberger describing his distilling process of his single malt vodka. He's like, and we distill it slow, and we take our time, and I don't force it through the filter. I let it naturally filter through. And when people compliment my mouthfeel, I take a lot of pleasure in that, because I know that that's directly tied to the way that I make this product. And so there's something about slow that affects process and product, but there's something about slow that is also antithetical to scale. And so I think that is one of the things that we see when somebody goes to scale. Like my favorite beer, actually my wedding beer, and I will call this company out because it's fine. I think they used to be good. I think they're less good now, but it was Victory out of Pennsylvania, and they had this awesome pale ale, which is one of the only straight up pale ales that I ever really liked. I'm not a big Sierra Nevada guy. Like, I like an IPA more than I like a traditional pale ale. For some reason, I'm not quite sure I can even articulate it, but there was one called Summer Love, and it was this amazing pale ale that Victory made. It was my wedding beer. We got a couple of cases of it. We stuck it in coolers, and it was enjoyed at my wedding. And I remember a couple years later, it was one of those seasonal releases, and it came out. I was like, oh, it's out. Yeah, I'm going to go grab a 6-pack. And I brought it back, and they had gotten bought out by some larger company since then, and I drank it, and I just dumped the other 5 bottles down the sink. And so there's something about scale that really puts you at risk for losing some things. And it doesn't surprise me that you're concerned by these things, because you're in the midst of it right now. You I imagine have to grapple daily or weekly with decisions in that sphere. So it makes sense that you're concerned about it.
Yeah, and I think I love that, because when we're talking about slowness, we're also talking about the attention to process that's so important in manufacturing. And as companies scale, there's often more and more pressure to make more money. And it's that pressure which causes reductions in the process, which causes ingredients to be lessened in their quality as margins are carved out, right? And I think that's one of the major things that happen in scaling that become really bad and are hard for a company. It becomes harder and harder for them to achieve the same quality that they did at a smaller level. So that really that focus on process is incredibly important, taking your time to brew something, but that's also the ingredients too, right? Like making sure that you continue to source the right ingredients there. And I think, for me, the last part that's so important about craft is a focus on people, right? I think that that the people who are brewing the product, that craft is inclusive, that it's respected, that the makers make fair wages, right? That the entire process of craft is not mechanized towards total max profit, but is maximized towards the best quality product and supporting the people that make it. And I think about what defines craft for me. It's like you said, it's just this slow is a wonderful word. It's this emphasis on process, and that includes ingredients. Then it's also the emphasis on the people who make it. And I think if we could round up our wagons around that, I think we would have the grounds for a pretty good definition, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about Europe, for example, you go to France, and every region is kind of chunked off, protected from other regions. It has its things that make it special, and part of what talking about slow is time for those vines to grow, time for the terroir to develop. There's no surprise that these wine regions year after year produce incredible things. It's because they were sort of designed that way, and there were protections put in place. And here in the US, one of the things that people, I don't think, realize is how wide open our regulations are in many respects, or how wide open our mindset is towards saying, anything goes. Can you make California? Sure, you can make California champagne. It's not going to be even remotely similar to the champagne that comes out of the real champagne, but we're okay with it. It's fine. It's the U.S. We have different rules here, and so I think some of our eagerness to innovate, some of our eagerness to scale is definitely antithetical to some of the things that we've been talking about when it comes to authenticity. And I do want to pull out just one other thing that strikes me about your products and your company in the authenticity realm is that, you're referencing a product category that existed 100, 200, perhaps even 300 years ago. And, you're very mindful of exactly what you're doing, not only to recreate, what you think ginger beer should taste like, alcoholic ginger beer should taste like, but also to kind of open it up and introduce it to the modern palate. There's the education aspect of things, and the, sort of making something that people are going to naturally gravitate to in today's market is also important, because if nobody knows about it, you can be as crafty as you want, but you're not going to be a company if nobody buys it.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think we should sample the breeze on that point right now, because
yes,
the breeze, I can tell you one thing I'm fairly certain on, is that there weren't readily available dried hibiscus flowers and lime juice in colonial Vermont, right? And so the breeze is our hibiscus and lime ginger beer. It's 4.5% alcohol. It's got a really beautiful color. You get that earthy floralness from the hibiscus, and hibiscus imparts its own sort of citrus. I find it's citrus-esque.
It really is.
Yeah, and the lime brings up that kind of islandy vibe to it, adds a little more citrus to it, and then a really mellow ginger finish on it just makes this super crushable, delicious, but surprisingly complex beverage.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, hibiscus, sometimes I think of hibiscus as almost cheating, because it's too good, and then it just gives that color. I mean, we use hibiscus in our lavender bitters. Actually, it's one of those flavors that we have sort of in the background. Lavender is a terrible product to work with from a flavor perspective, because it smells wonderful, but it tastes like soap. So anybody who really wants to make a good lavender bitters needs to throw in some stuff that's going to be adjunct to that primary intense note. And hibiscus is I think it's one of those flavors that year after year wins Best Supporting Actor. It is just this. It's lovely, and I think lime is smart too, because what you're doing here, and this is something I've been sort of interested in the cocktail space very, very recently, is combining products with different acid profiles to create an acid profile that is not just citric, that is not just malic, that is not just whatever the heck is in hibiscus. It's all of these things kind of at the same time. And when you bring in yeast fermentation, you get the lactic side of things as well. So what you have in this product is a really compelling acid profile to me. And you said it's a very gentle ginger at the end, and I think that's really fitting for this, because why have the ginger just kind of blow that really nuanced flavor profile right out of your palate?
Yeah, thank you.
It's really, really good.
Yeah, cheers. It's especially good when it's super hot outside, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Anything else special about the breeze? I mean, was this a recent release? Is this just one of your other best sellers?
Yeah. So the way that we usually bring products to market is we'll brew it for limited draft. We'll start in our tap room, then we'll bring a couple draft to restaurant, see how it's received, and then we'll eventually package it. It originally went to market as the Beach Cruiser, but that mark was taken, so we took the breeze. It's, to me, it connects to this. I'm originally from the ocean. I'm a Floridian by birth, and grew up on the beach in Florida, and it connects to this part of me, which is my love for the ocean, my love for warm, super breezy days, for being on the boat. Halyard. What a halyard is it's the name of a rope used on a sailboat to lower or raise a sail, right? And so for me, halyard, why I named halyard, after a rope on a sailboat, is, first of all, it connects to the colonial spice trade, kind of historically, but also connects to my own identity as a person who grew up on the ocean and a lover of water. Sometimes people are like, "But you're based in Vermont." And I'm like, "Yeah, but we have 100 miles of coastline here in Vermont, which is actually more than Connecticut. So don't give me that." The Lake Champlain is huge, and there's a pretty thriving sailing community here. But it also connects to who I am and my roots. And so the breeze to me is really this homage to, being sunburned, right, and having salt water on your skin, and having a cold, refreshing beer after being on the water all day.
Mm-hmm. I'm in a few days here. I will be out on a boat as well. So, and these are exactly the kind of beverages that I think of for summers out on the water. My primary recommendation to folks listening to this is if you're heading down to the beach, get yourself some Halyard, because this is not whether it's the Breeze or one of these other products, it can't be more seasonally appropriate than it is right now with things getting hot. In DC here, we went from 70-degree days straight to 90-degree days in 1 week, so that's how you know that summer's officially here.
Yeah, right.
And this is the sort of stuff that I'm craving.
And so then for the Mountainade, the last we're going to sample here. Look, this was inspired because of the El Diablo, right? We were making the El Diablo cocktail, and I loved how cassis worked with ginger beer. And I was like, well, black currants are grown here. I know where I can get some black currants. And so we brewed a ginger beer with black currants, also a gorgeous flavor. It's like red in color. Currant, talking about like complex acid profiles, right? Currant is this super interesting tiny little berry that's crazy high in antioxidants. It's tart, but it's also juicy like a berry. And so when you brew it with the ginger beer, you get this really unique tart and juicy ginger beer. And kind of like the Breeze, we didn't overdo it with the ginger, so you really kind of get the ginger at the end, and it leads with the currants. It
is crazy red. I mean, like, we think of hibiscus as being a very bright product. This is just like, it reminds me, and I don't know that I always pull this out of a currant product, but I guess maybe the combination of the currant with the ginger and the carbonation brings me almost into a pomegranate space here.
Yeah, that's cool. It's I can see nice, that for sure.
It's deep. It's deep on the nose. Like, I love currant products because there's just a lot going on, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. A little bit goes a long, long way. And You're right. It's just like, man. So Mountainade, is this sort of like the lemonade of the mountains? Is that the idea here?
Yeah. It's a 16-ounce format, not a 12-ounce format, right? We released it as something different, right, outside of our usual core. A friend of mine, Ty Williams, who I surf with, he was the artist who did the can art, and we take these little strike missions out to the Maine coast to go surfing together, and we were talking about it, and I asked him to do a label for us, and there's this sense that I love the idea of when you're doing adventure sports in Vermont, right? There's always this people bring beers with them, right? Like you hike at top of one of our mountains here, Mansfield or Camelsup, and there's people sitting on the top of the mountain after a several hour grueling hike having a beer. There's people shoving beer in their in their snowboard jackets as they ride the lift, right? It's like it's a thing in Vermont, and it's just like this feeling like, oh yeah, just a little bit of Mountainade, right? A little bit of help as whatever this like crazy Vermont thing we're doing. And that was the idea behind it, right? It's also low alcohol. It's still, only 4.5% alcohol. So it's something that you can take with you and not be crushed by it, but it's going to be really refreshing as well.
Yeah, it is. I would drink this on a mountain. I would drink it on the aforementioned boat. I mean, it's really wonderful. And I do like that. One of the things that we're seeing is you're referencing not only history, but also the place where you are actually creating these products. You were mentioning the research that your friend was doing, about the ginger beer industry in Vermont pre-prohibition. You're kind of staying close to not only your roots with the name Halyard Brewing, but also, the place where you're operating. And I think that's another signal of craft. It's not necessarily a guarantee of craft, because anybody can open up great example, City Winery. It's like, oh, is this wine made in no, this wine's not made in this city. They're just trying to make you think that it's kind of local. I mean, and that's fine. It works. They're profitable, but not necessarily what we would kind of identify as craft or, as truly local. It makes me think of some of the guys at Baltimore Spirits Company who make a Pachuga style smoked apple brandy, and when cool. You hear a bunch really? Of white guys are doing a Pachuga, you're automatically thinking appropriation. You're like, what do you guys have any business doing Pachuga with? But they instead of a fowl, they hang a Maryland ham in the still, and instead of other more exotic ingredients, they're foraging persimmons and black walnuts and pawpaws when they're in season, and throwing those into the still as well. So suddenly you go from something that sounds a little bit white guy appropriation-y to like, oh my goodness, like you guys really put the work into this. And instead of feeling like a little bit weird, it's like, wow, because you focused so much on place and because you really sat down with this and made good eye contact with it, which is also a phrase that I tend to use in association with authenticity. Because you made such intense eye contact with this product, you've got something that almost crosses over infinity, and it seems like this is perhaps the best way to honor that tradition of what Pachuga is, even though it's not your tradition. So I think that's some of the stuff that local can do in an effort to maintain authenticity, and in a way to just take your time and do fun projects as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that craft and authenticity also needs to be forward looking too. It's not just like making the best lager under the Reinskebo, right? It's also thinking about, how do I as a craftsperson make this anew, right? And I think that's a really important part of it. It's not just about reliving something that was done several hundred years ago, but it's trying to constantly reinvent and be a craftsperson in the process.
Yeah, I think that poses an interesting question. We have a good split on this show in terms of listenership. A lot of our listeners are just enthusiasts, and on the other hand, a lot of our listeners are actually people who make things. And so for those of you who are in that camp listening to this, I'd say that brings up an interesting litmus test that perhaps you can run when you're doing product development. You're trying to figure out what you should launch next, or how you should continue to innovate. And if you're looking at a project, I think you can simply ask, is this project something that is self-renewing or self-refreshing? Did it seem to come to you, or are you out there looking for something to try and to be the next glitter IPA, for example? If you're out looking for something, if the impetus comes from something that seems internal to the project that you're doing, internal to who you are, internal to what the product is, then I would say that's a good self-refreshing product that is a really worthy product to work on as what does the future mean for this industry. But if it seems like some of the impetus is coming from margins or coming from outside somewhere, to be not to reference the hashtag, but to be like, oh, me too, I can also make a hazy IPA, if we're referencing the trend of the past 2 years, then maybe that project is you succumbing to some market forces instead of being true to what craft is. So just a little litmus test. I don't know how you think of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think like it's hard because we all got to be in business, and otherwise we can be homemakers. And so we do have to walk that line. I think on the other hand, we can focus on process and people, right, and ingredients, and we can still carve new paths and even play around with gimmick, right? There's nothing wrong with playing around with gimmick, but like you said, I love this idea of self-renewing. Can we invent something that can run on its own, right?
Yeah, and I think that the cocktail space is a great place for gimmick, right? So like if you're going to do a gimmick, make it a special at the cocktail bar. Make it something ridiculous that you're doing with the crazy purple of the Mountainade. Make it cocktails are, in my opinion, the perfect place to get people excited, and then all right, great. Then next week, the special is going to be something else. And the fact that you were there on the week that they were running their ridiculous, like crazy special and got to experience that makes it special. That's a great place to kind of to do some of that and not have it be something that distracts from the core, the people, the products, the process.
Yeah.
So Kenny, this has been a really cool tasting. Again, didn't think that I was going to be tasting all these crazy ginger beers here this morning if you'd asked me about a month ago, but I'm glad that we had the chance to do that. It definitely opened my eyes in terms of what's out there. I mean, like I mentioned, I was familiar with dry mead, but I wasn't thinking of ginger beer in this way. So it got me really excited to start thinking about, cocktail applications. I'm excited to put together the featured cocktail, with one of the drinks that you feature in your brand materials. I'm gonna play around with that after we get off here. But is there anything else that you want to make sure that you tell our listeners about your products or your company before we jump into the lightning round?
Yeah, thank you for that last little space. Look, I'm trying to, as a team, we are trying to revitalize a forgotten ferment, and it's been hard. It's been really fun, and I want, first and foremost, I want Halyard to be approached and drink it first, have it as a product, and then for those of you out there who are really who are making cocktails, please send us the cocktails you make. We can add them to our social. We'd love to just experiment and play with them ourselves. Credit you when they come up. So please, my contact will be at the end. So please make sure to send those our way. We'd love to see them.
Absolutely, and we have a lot of creative folks out there who are listening. A lot of people who do way better in the Instagram space than I do. So I always rely on our listener base to take the pretty pictures. And with some of the colors that we have here, these are definitely grammable products. So I'm excited to see what they come up with. And now on to the lightning round. So you had a cocktail bar kind of attached pre-COVID. So I assume that you're pretty familiar with mixed drinks. What is your favorite cocktail of all time? And if you don't have a favorite, what's something that you've been playing around with more recently?
Yeah, I love this question. I've got two answers for you. First answer is during COVID, over the last year and a half, I guess, I rediscovered the gin martini. My grandmother used to drink them and feed me olives when I was young, right? And look, I'll let you read into why the martini became my COVID beverage for all sorts of reasons, but pretty simple, straight up, ounce and a half of Beefeater, ounce of Dolan dry, quarter ounce olive brine, and 2 olives stirred over ice and strained. So that's been my cocktail over the last year. But my all-time favorite cocktail, I love rum, I love agricole. So my all-time favorite cocktail has got to be the tea punch. Agricole, fresh lime juice, and cane syrup. Just amazing. It's perfect. It makes me happy.
Yeah, absolutely. My friend Chase Babcock from St. Benevolence would be happy to hear that. I think I actually see a lot of similarities between your project and his project, and the way that you guys both kind of approach things. So yeah, the tea punch, if you haven't, you should check out an article called Plato and Aristotle Walk into a Bar by Dave Wondrich in the Daily Beast. It was done a couple years ago. I think we have an episode. I liked it so much, I think I did an episode on it. It talks about the differences between the tea punch, or the similarities and differences between different members of the rum sour family. So we've got the tea punch, we've got the daiquiri, and then we've got the caipirinha. And so it talks about how these three cocktails with all the same ingredients can be viewed as, platonically very similar, or if you're taking a bit different approach, you can really zoom in on some of the process aspects that really make the tea punch special. And I think to me, the tea punch, more than any of those three, has that really special process. There's a very specific way to cut the lime, very specific way to integrate the flavor into the actual drink, built in the glass. So I think it's a really, really cool gin sour. Next, what is a seemingly small, this is a new question, what's a seemingly small or idiosyncratic occurrence that always makes your day? And the example I'll give here is whenever I see a bunch of little birds kind of ganging up on a big bird, it always makes me smile. It's like one of those ways in which nature kind of mirrors the things, the stories that we tell about our own own lives. So I love seeing a bunch of big birds gang up, or little birds gang up on a big bird.
Yeah, I love this question. I love unexpectedly catching the moonrise. You turn a corner and there's just the moon, like right there rising. You're like, whoa, look at this planet that's orbiting our planet. And it always catches me by surprise and makes me happy.
Do you live at a place where you have decent vistas?
Sometimes depends on, it's mountainous. So some roads you can catch it, and it's always beautiful if you see it kind of rising over the mountains because it helps with the perspective, and it just makes it look huge and really pretty.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great answer. Cocktail with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drink? Just kind of paint us a picture.
Oh, this is a really hard question.
Nobody likes it.
This goes back to my academic days and reading, and I really love the philosopher Baruch Spinoza. He was a philosopher, incredibly important philosopher, arguably one of the most important philosophers since Plato. He lived in the Dutch Netherlands, and and Eric holds a book up. Yeah, that's awesome. He was a philosopher that lived in the Dutch Netherlands in the 17th century, and I would imagine sitting, going out to the beach, right, or maybe a boardwalk overlooking the water, and this is pre-cocktail, right? So we'd probably be sharing a bottle of Armagnac, right? Talking about nature, intuition, time, human struggles, how he's having to hide his work from the authorities, but he's still feeling pressed. He could be killed for some of the work he's doing, and how it's being hidden in bookstores inside other books, and his philosophy is spreading underneath the ground. Right? I would love that experience.
Yeah, Spinoza is a fascinating guy. The book that I held up is actually a neuroscience book called Looking for Spinoza, in which contemporary neuroscience kind of walks through different aspects of philosophy and how Spinoza's natural philosophy kind of is an interesting way to break down and parse out some of the ways that our brain works, specifically through feelings and emotions. So like it kind of works to dissolve and then rebuild back up that idea of mind-body dualism that was so important, because Spinoza did have a little bit of overlap with Descartes, obviously the original Cartesian dualist, and so it's interesting to see how that gets parsed out. I'm not done with it yet, so I don't know all the answers, but Spinoza's a fascinating guy, and I'm definitely going to read a little bit more about him next time I get a chance.
Awesome. Sounds like a great book.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. What is a unusual or controversial belief that you hold in the spirits and cocktail world?
This might come as blasphemy in Vermont, but look, Haze Bros, you need to get over yourselves, right? I love a good IPA. Do not get me wrong, but the brosphere is just out of control. Like, it's just too much. It's still the fastest, only growing category in craft beer. It still gets insane amounts of hype everywhere, and it's just like, I get it. I'm over it.
So if that's interesting. I agree. Yeah, it can be a little much. I tend not to go into too many beer aisles anymore, just because it's like, I know it's just gonna be like, all right, now I have to thumb through all these. It's exhausting to have to thumb through all the new IPAs, to be honest. Just like, all right, I know that there's a couple I like. Instead of gravitating towards new things to try, I've actually found myself gravitating towards things that I already know now, because it's like, all right, I don't have time to try all these. So there's that. But I guess as a follow-up, like, what's a category that you would love to see like blow up, that you're not very like hopeful is going to blow up? Like, if you could just make a category blow up, what would it be?
Oh man. That's a great question. I love English bitters, like bitter, like a classic English bitter. I think is a great beer. It's not going to blow up. Breweries have tried. It's not going to happen, but they're great beers.
People will put ESB on there, right? English Special Bitter.
Yeah.
On the can usually. For me it would be porters.
Yeah, it's another great one.
I think porter is it's a fantastic way to take the dark maltiness of a stout, but not necessarily need to have as much sugar in there. So again, it's, kind of referencing your project, it can be a little bit drier and still have some of that depth and complexity. So yeah, I think that's a great question. I think people listening to this, like, what's your answer to that question? What would be one product or category in whatever space that you are not confident is ever going to be as popular as whatever the current popular trend is. But like if you could just flip a switch, or, you know, a genie would give you a wish and you could make that category blow up, how would the world be a better place in your eyes? I think that's a cool little thought experiment to run, especially if you have strong opinions about a category of just being like, oh my God, more of this.
It's super cool because it's like rum, right? Like rum is starting to have its moment, kind of like mezcal did, right? And I'm super torn about it. On one hand, all of these rum manufacturers, right, distillers, are maybe going to get paid well and going to be able to turn a bottle for what it's worth. On the other hand, I don't want to like fight for rums. I don't want them to have shortages on shelves. I don't want to like go through the, you know, premiumization of rum that other spirits have gone through. So it's like that's like a category that I'm glad is seeing it's coming, but I'm also like a little nervous about it, right?
I think that's fair. I think the one saving grace of if we're going to compare the rum rise to the agave rise, I think that I think that rum has way better potential for community impact and sustainability than agave does, just because you're working with something that grows over the course of a single year, a couple months, as opposed to something that sits in the ground for, you know, 8 to 12 to 18 years before you harvest it for, you know, depending on the species. So I think that it's certainly something to be nervous about for all the reasons that you said. I'm not excited about the premiumization either, but it's upon us whether we like it or not. But yeah, I think that's a really smart observation. Well, Kenny, this has been a fantastic conversation. I love nerding out with people who are willing to meet me and nerd out in the spaces where I like to be, talking about Spinoza, talking about Peruvian ginger. Can you wrap us up here by telling folks how they can get a hold of Halyard Brewing products, and especially if there's any way to do direct shipment, because I know that that's been a really popular option of home delivery since COVID.
Yeah, thanks. So fortunately or unfortunately, we are a craft beer. We are a beer in the federal government's eyes. So I cannot be shipping across state lines right now due to distribution contracts and the complexity of it. Please reach out to your senators and tell them to, you know, disrupt the 3-tier system. But for the moment, I can't ship it to you. Please reach out to me. You can hit us on Instagram at Halyard Brewing, or shoot us an email, info@halyardbrewing.us. I see those, so I'm happy to respond if you're curious about where we're distributed, where you can find us. Another great way is to reach out to your local distributor and say, or one of your local beer stores and say, hey, like, I'd really like some Halyard. How do we get that? And that's usually all it takes to help get product into the market.
Nice. And you did mention Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Publix. Do you have are those just kind of a mixed bag in terms of what states you're in?
Yeah, that's right. We're distributed throughout New England, so you can find us in almost all the Whole Foods in New England, and most of the Trader Joe's in New England as well. There are select Total Wines. Publix is in North Florida, as well as Whole Foods in North Florida. And then in states that are who do not allow chains to proliferate, like Massachusetts and New Jersey, oftentimes you can find us at your local beer store down the street.
As a guy from Massachusetts who will be shortly traveling to New Jersey, that pains me, but yes. So yeah, check it out. New England folks, you should have no problem getting this, and everybody else certainly expect to, as the company continues to grow and scale, see more and more of these products more available in your area. So Kenny, thanks once again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a real pleasure.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 2 big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, The more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook @modernbarcart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed. Delicious alcoholic ginger beer courtesy of Kenny Richards and Halyard Brewing Company, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2021.